Welcome all. Welcome to Experience Fridays. For those who are here for the first time, just sharing that this is something we do internally every week on Fridays, but at the end of the month, we kind of open it up to everybody. And we have great speakers like Naveed joining us from various fields and coming and sharing their experiences. It's been lovely so far, and today promises nothing less. I'm sure it's going to be great. Um just as a format, guys, just please type in your questions or introduce yourselves on the chat. And while Naveed is doing the presentation, I'll ask the questions if at the right time. And this is just to avoid any Zoom bombing and that kind of stuff. So just precautions. Uh, but yeah, otherwise we can just get started. We have a great presenter here today, Naveed Ahmed. He's been a part of Adobe, and uh, unluckily for me, I think we just missed crossing each other's paths while he was at Adobe and I was. I think I left in 2013 and he just left a year later. He joined a year later. So yeah, I didn't have the fortune of working with him during that time, but at least I get to meet him now. So Naveed is also the currently design manager at Microsoft, and Naveed, you've got a characteristic which is of late becoming a trend, where computer, I mean, people with programming backgrounds are becoming designers. So I don't know if this is an exodus or if it's just a blip, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that when you do get started. Uh, so
Sure,
uh,
sure.
yeah, I like the topic that you've chosen, Naveed, for today. Obviously, a lot of people like it as well. The designing for enterprises. So I'm sure there'll be lots of lively questions and discussions to be had. And with that, I'll just hand it over to you. Do you mind talking a little more about what you do at Microsoft before you get started?
Sure, sure, definitely, Sharon. So there's a slide about what I do.
Okay.
So I'll just talk about that then. So yeah, thanks, Sharon. Thanks for the quick intro. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today, and hope you're all doing well in these unexpected times. And before I start off, thank you, Red. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Preeti and Guru, for inviting me for this talk. This topic has been something I wanted to write about for a very long time, and thanks for getting me started on this. So I'll definitely be publishing something on this soon. And so moving forward, designing for enterprises, or a much longer title, which I have, what I learned designing experiences for enterprises in the past 10 years. Uh, and a bit about me. I'm Naveed Ahmed. Currently, I'm at Microsoft. I'm part of this product team called OneDrive and SharePoint, and specifically Microsoft Lists. If you have heard about the product, I lead a design team here in India. And before Microsoft, I was at Adobe, where we are building a 1.0 product in the learning management domain. And before Adobe, I was at design school. This is where I talk about your question, Sharon. Engineers moving to design. So if you see, I started designing in my first year of engineering long back, and that's when I realized that these small changes which you do, small designs which you make, just a poster or an app, and it has such a great impact in terms of. Uh, I started with event management and those kind of things, and I saw the impact, and I said this is where I wanted to be. And when I joined Infosys, I was part of product team and continued working on products. And then that sort of helped me go to a few places like Red Hat, where they wanted someone who could understand code and design at the same time. And in an environment where people didn't understand the difference between different shades of gray, I sort of thrived in that complexity, and trying to build this code browser for the Red Hat Linux code base, an early version of GitHub for the internal use. But I think that's where the engineers are finding this sweet spot, where engineers are always these problem solvers, but then through design, there is this huge scope for impact across peers. And the impact is what made me stay in the enterprise space for very long, where the kind of products I've worked on, like currently SharePoint has 190 million users, and that's like a huge number. And uh, before I took up this job, I was a bit worried as to how I would handle that scale. But then this is what the talk is all about. So moving forward, enterprise software. So what comes to somebody's mind when we say enterprise software? It's B2B, software as a service, or platform as a service, those kind of things. But what is so characteristic about enterprise software is the fact that in the first place, there are thousands of users using the software, uh, and most of the times it runs into millions, and not just static the number of users, but the daily users of a product are usually in millions for enterprise products. And the most important characteristic of enterprise products is non-linear workflows. Workflows are usually like, I buy a product, add it to cart, I make the payment, I'm done. But in enterprise products, it's like, you buy a product, it goes to the finance department, it goes to the procurement department, it goes to I don't know, approval department, and then it reaches you after like 30 days, and the payment happens another 40 days later. So there are these all kinds of complex workflows which intertwine and mingle with each other to actually form these enterprise products. Then another thing is about specialized software. So a lot of these enterprise products usually exist in very specific domains. If you look at the CRM domain, where people like Salesforce and Oracle thrive, they're very specialized softwares, and not in most cases they're not generic software, and that's what makes brings up very interesting challenges in these products. And at the end of the day, enterprise products are all about productivity. It's about somebody trying to get a job done in the fastest way possible, and it's their bread and butter. And and it's always about easing the workflows, easing the nonlinear workflows, making them as good and as easy to use as possible. And when we talk about enterprise products, uh, these are the kind of companies that come to your mind. SAP, Cisco have been, IBM have been there for very long. So if the left side of the screen shows like people who operate purely on the enterprise software space. On the right is people who do consumer and enterprise both. But more than this, what is important is that the places where these enterprise products operate, which is schools, hospitals, the NYSC, the BSc, everybody uses products. And I have been lucky to work on some of these products where places like hospitals or even stock exchanges use. So it's basically everywhere. Everything which you can't see, if it's being run, it's run by an enterprise software. And when somebody says design for enterprise software, and even I, before taking up some of these assignments, I was like, I'm losing control of this PowerPoint. This is the kind of screens that come to people's minds. A lot of data, a lot of visualization and crammed up content. And how do you even design for this? For people who come from design schools and talk about architecture and data and all these people, how do you handle these kind of things, right? That's like super. You get crazy after some time. Now, and one thing about enterprise software is this is not exactly how people react. People definitely don't do this when enterprise software are released or people talk about enterprise software. It's more of like this, because like I said, it's about productivity, and if you frustrate them, this is what happens. And a lot of designers fear to even enter this space because it's such a deep space. And I've known designers who have been in the enterprise space, gone back to consumer because they feel happier there. So the 10 things I learned during my course of navigating my path through these complications, or rather I would say the top 10 among the many things. I wanted to make it as concise as possible. I came up with 15, then I came up with 17, then 13, then I thought 10 is a good number, let's make it look good. So same, the scale problem like an enterprise software. So I'll just, so the first thing in any enterprise software which I have seen, which I didn't know about before I joined, was there are people who actually use or you sell your software to. It's the user and the customer. We as designers, we always learn about users, user-centric research, contextual inquiries, being with them, talking to them, understanding them. But there is one other part of people in enterprise users who are actually decision makers. So if you look at the typical persona, there are these people who end user who actually use your product, but the decision making is in the hands of the CEO, CFO, or the whatever executive level people. And these are a different breed of people altogether. And as a designer, if you make a persona, this is what your user contextual research comes of it. But in reality, this is how it is. The end user has zero influence on the purchase decision. The whole purchase decision depends on the CFO itself. And this is where people, when you try to sell the product, you're actually selling it to the boss and not the end user. Now, and this created a lot of conflict within myself when I was designing software that, oh, this great UI I'm making, but at the end of the day, it's been shot down because that's not the feature, that's not the workflow, which the end user, which the salespeople is even trying, cannot even sell it. For
Mm.
example, when designing, I always focused on this Jacob Nielsen's heuristics, right? Pretty straightforward. What do you do? But then the sales team or the product team comes up with a list of things which actually help you get your foot into the door. When you're selling an enterprise product, people like Gartner, people like BCG, Boston Consulting Group, they come up with a list of 250 parameters which say what software you should buy and what features it should have. And when you're designing this, you're actually conflicted between UX priorities and business priorities. And the way I handled it when I was working at, or I understood over time, is that the first phase, you just focus on usability, but pick up the key uh, areas of usability, and mainly concentrate on the business priorities. And the graph would look something like this. Like the first phase is usually market acquisition phase, where you have to churn out features. No, a CFO is not buying a feature because the animation is slightly less, though it's sometimes it's complicated to actually get the animation in place. But the CFO wouldn't buy the feature for the product for that. He will not buy it if the number of features is less. So addressing the business priorities became important. At the same time, we had to ensure that we come up with a design strategy which is very layered and that balances product priorities. So if you see in the beginning of the graph, the first few years, there's a lot of business. At the same, and as you proceed further into the growth phase, and the product itself feels that it's making money, that's where the UX and business sort of priorities become 50-50. And that's when you can start building a stronger experience base for your product and for your users. Now, so that's like a quick thing of what I did. So I have, so in, sorry, I have like 10 points. So I'll be quickly going through each of these actually, because it might take a really long time. So if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. Sharon will be asking me and I'll be stopping in between for questions. And the next big point in my life was this love-hate relationship with scale. Scale brings a lot of interesting opportunities and at the same time, a lot of threats. So I'm running my notes on a different device, so I keep forgetting which device I'm operating here. So this is the kind of product I have been working on. Like I said, SharePoint, 190 million users. One small change you make, and there is this huge blow up in some part of the world, where people start commenting, not necessarily on Twitter, but in the enterprise channels. And OneDrive, which I have been working on. Accenture alone has 1.7 billion files on it. And when we're building Captivate Prime 1.0 product at Adobe from scratch, it was addressing a $9 billion market, which is 22 years old. And what would be a differentiator for us? There were all these kind of problems. And at Red Hat, we were building a code browser for a code base of 27 million lines, probably one of the largest in the world. So when you talk about scale, these were the kind of scale issues which you face when uh, at least I faced when I was building these products, like data and information, right? Like when you're in the consumer space, maybe you're building a screen which renders data of 10,000 lines or 10,000 list items. But in SharePoint, when the number of list items it can handle is 30 million. The kind of issues you face is like really, really different. Now, there is no browser that can handle 30 million code, 30 million items on a screen. Now, how do you deliver an experience for that? And then that's where the technology problems come in, where you actually have to speak to the Chromium team or Edge team to try to figure out what would be the best experience that the browser itself can build in, so that your UI is supported. And with scale comes this all really weird workflows and scenarios where in SharePoint itself, if you say 190 million users and even 0.01% of people are outliers, that's still 2 million people, and there are never really outliers in enterprise space. Most of the everything you can think of, in most a million people will get affected by it, definitely. So you can't actually ignore anything which is happening, and that is where it impacts your time and your design processes itself. Like something which you think you can deliver in 1 month, you suddenly realize uh, a, a specific group of people are facing certain accessibility issue, and that takes like another 2 months to solve, and that overall increases your development time by 300%. Now, that's where, so the other things include, the stakeholder management, which I think is one of the most primary things, because design is just, I would say, 5% of the whole job when you're in, and even Sharon would agree with this. With
I would
time,
understand. Yeah.
design, you just let go of design and it's just managing your partners and, engineering and product management, sales, and it gets really crazy. 5 designers and the rest of in the team of like what, 400 people, who's the rest of them. So how do you handle these things, right? So some of the things I realized for addressing scale was the documentation and process, which uh, I felt when you document things, it just stays. And when the cycle, an enterprise product life cycle is usually 2 years. I mean, like at least 2 years for a full product to actually go out into the market. And a feature which might take in a startup a month, in a big company takes like 4 months, because for the kind of loops it has to go through. So unless you document your design thinking processes, reviews, comments, and everything, you won't actually you can't actually keep track of it. And one best way to do that is process. And once the process is in place, I think design can actually convince a lot of stakeholders to actually get the right thing done, do the right thing. And the second point is the design system. I think a lot of people are actually building design systems these days, enterprises, small companies, everyone, in terms of the UX language. But I think once you have a good design system in place that is consistent with the marketing language, the product placement in the market over time, it's actually builds a very good UX for the product. It's very difficult to actually build a robust design system. It's like a living document. If a product lives for 10 years, the design system keeps evolving for 10 years. And in the end, uh, have a plan A, plan B, plan C, right? I think it looks like there are quotes which say never have a plan B because you'll never stick to plan A. But then what I have seen, like there's an interesting scenario which I faced some time back, was I had a box on the screen and there was a simple shadow, and that was the plan A, but the browser could not support it because it was adding, I think, 4 KB to the CSS or some kind of, or the whole code itself, and my engineering was not ready to take it. And I was pretty much convinced, because performance is what is important. So when you're actually designing for these products, always be ready for some kind of a graceful degradation, and make sure that removing that feature or that experience does not break everything else. So make sure there is a level 1, level 2, level 3 of the whole design itself, so that you can release it to the market in a layered approach whenever it is possible. Graceful degradation, I would say, is what that means. So, but yeah. So the next thing, domain knowledge is key. Like we as experienced designers, we tend to be generalists. We don't want to go deep into a lot of projects. we are okay with designing experience, and we think a lot of these experiences work very similarly across products. But the iceberg was obviously a giveaway when I say it's just the tip of the iceberg. Being a generalist, you just scratch the surface, and subject matter expertise is super deep. And when I was working on these domains, and these are the domains I've worked in the last 10 years, like insurance and healthcare, that was my most toughest thing. Understanding HIPAA rules and understanding what happens in Europe, and this is really complicated. And in the recent years, when I was working on file storage, learning management, enterprise productivity, I had to go through all the GDPR policies just to understand how can we make the user experience better for people. And you just can't do this just by knowing how file storage works. You have to really go into last 30 years of how things have been happening, how people do productivity for 50 years, and how governments are changing, how policies are redefining these things, right? And things as simple as uh, the URL changes because of GDPR rules, and that URL might get really not, uh, I won't say ugly, but not great looking stuff. Now you have to address a lot of these issues when you realize these issues, when you actually go deep into the uh, you know area. Now the way I tried to become an expert is partner with these domain experts. I remember when I was working on the healthcare product, we had doctors in the team, like engineers, doctors, designers, and testers sitting together. And that was a great experience because there are kind of things they knew, which the way insurance works, or the way what insurance policy to be applied where, it's they who know the best. And they were the people who are helping us out. And this, I would say, should be a constant relationship which we maintain, so that we always design the best product and the experience possible. And the second one, another good thing about being in enterprises, and also helps my affinity towards research, is that access to good research. Like I was speaking about Gartner and BCG, these reports cost like $1,700 per report, or like, and they're released once in a year. It's like 1,000-page report on which productivity tool you should buy, or which learning management you should buy, systems you should buy. So getting access to these reports and reading these reports was really enriching to understand how people think, what market wants, right? If you read those reports on like ACM or IEEE, I felt those were very, very primitive in terms of compared to these reports. So these really help you become an expert. And then, like in any user research or design process, speak to your customer constantly. And customer is, like, I would say, you should co-design with the customers. It's not like you did the design research, user research, and then you're done with it. I would say there was a time when we used to, in the open source world, when I was in Linux working on some Firefox features and some Fedora Linux features, we used to have like a continuous channel of chat where we used to hear people every day as to what they're thinking about our builds and releases. And that greatly helped us get deep into the product and get better with our experiences. Now, in all this space, right? We spoke about all this space, how things exist, what people do, but the user still exists. There is the user, and their adoption and behavioral patterns in enterprise software is very different. They don't. It's not like somebody is they're buying a software like, oh, I don't want to use Ola today. I'll just switch to Uber. It's not that easy for them. The reason they actually switched to a product is because they got an email from them for their admin, or they were trained on it to actually use this software. And in most cases, or in a lot of cases, they're forced to use certain software, and they have no other go. And there's a reason for a lot of frustration, a lot of you know agony across users, like the GIF we saw. And a lot of leaders are moving to this new phase of, like Satya Nadella, I heard in one of the talks, he said, we want people to move from needing Windows to choosing Windows. It's not like there's no other option other than Windows. You create an experience so great that people actually want to start using your product and your uh, uh, yeah, your software. Now, in how the users So the users usually in this space, they understand their task really well. So when you give them a large software like a CRM, it's usually a single user may only know 10% of the product, but he'll know it really well. And they have their workarounds and they have their own ways of doing it, which you do not intend and which you do not would not have planned. And sometimes they may not be the right way, the way you thought, but because they know their domain really well, so well, that they have their own way of doing things with the same software. So if you speak to 100 users across 100 companies, each will have their unique way of doing things. And being user centric, it may not always be possible to actually make your product in 100 different ways. And that's where this whole internationalized localization and customization features come in, which I'll talk about further. So the main thing is here is the users are in a very specific context. They know their domain really well, and when you give them a product, even if it is forced to them, they somehow get their way around it, and they are pretty good at doing their job through these software. Now, in the same context, I always have told this particular statement to a lot of my engineers, right? Enterprise users are human too. Like, I remember, using Squirrel Mail like 6 years back. It's a PHP based email software and it still looks like it was made in 1985. And I don't think anybody deserves that kind of experience, right? Even enterprise users, they are humans. That's what I've been telling people. And it's not that easy to convince for multiple reasons, engineers, for multiple reasons, because the kind of excuses they come up with, uh, it's okay, they're just admins, they'll just get used to it. you know we don't need this shadow, we don't need this animation, users will not even notice. But the nuance of the design, explaining the nuance, it's something you feel. Now how do you get this across? And there are things like, there's a major thing, like I was seeing a Nielsen Norman Group video recently, and this thing popped up. It said they learn it during the training, because most of the enterprise software people are trained upon, and there's a lot of big industry in training. So it's like very difficult to convince people otherwise, especially legacy software which has been in the market for 30-40 years. You want to make changes, and this is definitely something you'll hear every day. And this is one thing I always tell them, these people also deserve our love, compassion, and higher productivity over anything else. uh, so I would say treat them well, because productivity always outweighs loyalty. uh, like the Uber Ola example, right? Wherever the money is, they just go there, and wherever the productivity, especially you get the cab earlier in Uber, you just go there. Similarly, if your product is not giving productivity, or it's too complex to understand, or too complicated, people will just go, though they are experts, they know your product A to build really well, use really well, they'll just go to product B, because that's how people are. They are humans.
Yeah.
Don't think they'll be forced and they have a choice of not using your software. Then building forgiveness into the system, like this is something which I realized when you do this heuristic evaluation of legacy softwares. These are unforgiving. Like, you do a mistake, you're stuck. Like, you submit a wrong expense report, you're just stuck, right? You have to contact 10 other people just to get it reverted. Now, and when there are these large CRM system with multiple workflows, people want to try out things, people want to do things, just experiment around, especially new products, and see how it works. What if you click this button, what happens? And if you click this button and it commits automatically and there is no undo, it's very difficult. And these undos, people live, well, like, take days to complete this process, and if the project messes it up in the end, it's a really bad situation for them. So make sure your system has this forgiveness in place. Let people do mistakes, let them grow with the product, and you will grow along with it. And the value prop is always productivity. If you can sell them the productivity through your business case studies or through your marketing language, everything, it will sell. And that's what will bring in loyalty at the same time. So productivity is the top thing which will sell for your enterprise product. Now, so I'm almost halfway through in the presentation.
We have a few
I would
questions.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask Sharon. So
I think this question has to do with a couple of points ago. So the question from Karthik is, how do you balance this methodology with timelines? And what is the level of compromise? So I think you were talking about the way you, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, which exact place was this?
I think it was in point 3. So Karthik, I can unmute you if you want. You want to ask the
The
question?
one with the scale. Yeah, please, Karthik. If you can.
Yeah, it was the one where you're talking about, how much you have like over the features and the UX, and then you pick which one you want, and to start you go with the features and stuff. So that like points 2 and 3 combined with timelines. How do you compromise on the level of research, or have you had to compromise?
I think it always depended upon, like I said, the amount of time you spend, like on what's priority. Like uh, there are a set of 10 features. Now, in the beginning, there are some things which you would, uh, I would say it was more like choosing the lesser evil as to what you prioritize. Uh, Let me think about how what I did it. Let me do one thing. Let me just come back to this question in the end, Karthik.
So there's another question where I think this is also going to be quite a deep conversation. How do you measure the success of a product or a product feature? I mean, you've got multiple stakeholders, and you also have this, license-based purchase where you're buying a license for a suite of products. So if you're dealing with one of the products, how do you measure success? That would be my interpretation of that.
Measuring success, I think it's a very complicated space, especially in the enterprise product, right? Uh, Success can mean different things, and obviously for the company, it's always the money. And and measuring success in terms of, for example, a product like Word or Teams, right? They don't have a direct sales model. They buy the suite. Now, what do you do about this? And the only thing I have found measuring success, what meant success to me was going to conferences and expos and actually talking to the end users. And I have had situations where people have come to me and said, thanks for making this feature. It really solved the problem for my whole company, right? That was success for me. And that actually makes you happy. Like, you don't think about it like, uh, what will happen to my future, but when actually people come and talk to me that my fishing business expanded by like 6x in the past 1 year because of this tiny feature which you build, it gives you happiness. So that was success for me. Now, there are NPS scores, there are other ways of measuring success, but I think I would just leave that to the business, though they contribute directly to my product. But user happiness and user love is what I would love to measure. And like you said, it's a long process, it's a deep conversation.
Yeah.
But I would say those are my success parameters, personal success parameters.
Let me just ask a follow-up on this. At least in Adobe, you remember we used to have these customer advisory boards, right? So we would constantly be talking to these small group of customers and discussing the features that we're building and so on. How are you doing it now? What have you seen as the best practices across the industry to get that feedback?
So that's one. That's a plus with the large enterprises, Sharon. That
Yeah.
you have this customer advisory boards, or we have something called the MVPs in Microsoft. The I forgot the full form. Most valuable. It's not most valuable player. I think these are the people who are like the intermediaries between people who who actually sell the software in the market, and they are our subject matter experts, and we speak to them as frequently as we speak to our users. So personally, in my team, we have a weekly meeting with these people who actually the customer advisory boards.
Okay.
We have a meeting every week to actually understand how the feature is doing in the market and what they are hearing, and what would be a follow-up of this feature, and what would it be 6 months later. And these are the same people. 50% of our conferences are full of MVPs and these advisors, and we meet them, and they are almost like part of our team. And sometimes when you think something is not working, uh, these people know why it is not working. And and Microsoft opening up to a lot of open source contribution these days, these people are contributing a lot back to the enterprise than it was earlier.
Okay. We have another question from Harsh, who says, how do you make design decisions in such a complex product? Let me tack on one more question to that. Microsoft is very famous for, in my head, for having said this one thing, which really stands out years after I heard it, which is you make a feature based on a user base of one. Is that really still something that you guys aspire to within Microsoft?
Though I'm from Microsoft, that is something I've never heard before, Sharon.
Okay.
And I really want to understand what that actually means. But
Yeah.
like
So it's
some of our, yeah, please.
Sorry, I wanted to explain. So if you've got like features of Word, for example, if somebody is using this one particular feature, it stays in the successive versions and so on. So I think that's how you measure, right? Whether there's a significant percentage of users using a particular feature. So in some interview, some arcane interview, please don't ask me to quote where, I heard that Microsoft retains or works on a feature if there's at least one user on it. So,
Yeah, I don't know how far and how necessarily that is true,
okay.
but I think, like I said, outliers are never really outliers in large products, right? Like I think Office has a base of 500 million users. Now, I don't think there'll be a single user who will be using a single feature. And at the same time, it's not just that, Sharon, or I don't know who asked the question. Sorry, I don't remember the name.
Harsh,
But
yeah.
yeah, Harsh. So the way the balance happens is mainly the design cost and the engineering, the build cost, right? Like a feature might take 2 years to build, something as simple as just let me give an example, removing the clippy on the right, it used to just knock on your screen for like years.
Yeah.
Removing that would have taken so many years just because of the technical complexity of the product. And getting in the features is equally complicated. Like there are no APIs, there are no things in place, and at the same time, when people like Microsoft focus a lot on performance, we want to render a screen like in X time possible. Now, what is the cost that will take uh, to actually build this? So one approach here which we realized is, like I say, plan A, plan B, plan C. What is the layered approach you follow? So what is your MVP? What is your minimum viable product or minimum viable experience which you will want in the product, and just go incrementally from there. And then half the time is just convincing your product manager and your engineer to just take him to a coffee and convince him, like, why don't you just build this? Sometimes it's as easy as that. Sometimes it's just reprioritizing things and just following this layered UX approach.
Sure. Okay, I think we have a few more questions, but I think you're going to cover it anyway, so we can catch up again. A couple of questions now. Yeah.
Sure. So let me just move. So less is more. Uh, Saying this is probably the section with the largest number of slides. Less is more. A great saying and a principle coming from the minimalist architectural background, but in this context it's not always true. Like when you say less is more, I thought when I was from a freelance background, enamored by Apple in the early days of Apple, the great products, great new interfaces. My thing was like, okay, this is a very complex interface. How do we make it simple? Like if you see the remote on the right, maybe you use just the volume up and the channel button. You don't use anything else most of the time. Now, how do you simplify this whole thing? And in software context, it was this. How do you actually simplify this whole IIS screen or this BlackBerry settings? So I always thought it was about doing this, just make that screen this.
Yeah.
And make that remote this. And these things work, but these are very contextual, and these don't, personally I feel, they never work in the enterprise context, because these are not linear tasks. A task in an enterprise is not as simple as using the Apple remote and changing selecting a different video. It's much more complex than that. It's somewhat like this. It's like everywhere, and it's like intertwined, and it's like processes which go haywire and go on for days, and involve like 100 people working on it. So it's doing this is not always possible, and this is what I realized like halfway through my career, and after a lot of I would say this was a self realization phase, I would say, for me. When I said achieving this is impossible, it's more about pick up what works, what you think is primary, fix it, or what you do is reduce the clutter, reduce it. And there's so much clutter, make sure that people reach their targets or reach their software or their features as easily as possible. So there's never a possibility that you'll end up with products like what Brown did, Dieter Rams and Brown did, simple products, great looking products with just a single knob. That is not always possible, or in most cases not possible in enterprise products. It's about how simple you make of the approach or reach to this product or understanding of these enterprise workflows. So when I say less is more in the enterprise context, it's all about reducing clutter, reducing the confusion, reducing the randomness in these workflows, and at the same time, through your design, through your creativity, make sure they're easy to use, increase clarity, increase predictability, so that your users, though your software is complex, find it easy to use. And that's where a lot of things like CRMs actually excel. They do one thing and they do that really well. And that's also the reason there's so many enterprise products, because some products do really well what they do and they just don't want to get into other domains. And that's good, because that increases productivity and that just does the job well. Next is eat your own dog food. Now, enterprises do this a lot. Slack is a great example of dog food. And for people who don't know what a dog food is, it's so what companies like Microsoft and other big enterprises do is, before the product goes into a release, even beta release, it's released for their employees internally. Like, you actually use your product live. You live with the product for a very long time before it goes to the market. That's where the product cycles really increase. And Slack excelled because Slack would release their nightly builds every night to their own company and to their own employees, and they got so many lot more scenarios that they could build such a integrated and good product, and that sort of helped soar their popularity with time. And and when you say dog food, when I say dog food, it's not about just taking it, testing your scenario and just saying that okay, it's working well. It's actually living with it, because when there are like 100 workflows and you're designing two, they're pretty much in isolation. And when you actually use your products in a live scenario, that is when you understand how it interacts with every other feature and every other part of the whole product itself. Now, the way I did it was, even today at Microsoft, I built this tiny projects with real world scenarios. Like, when we were building this learning management system at Adobe, what I did was I created a course. I took courses from Coursera and I replicated them on the system, and I used them over 4 days, 5 days. And I would find scenarios like, oh, went back to this course. Now I don't know where I started at the first level. Or I was taking notes. Now I realized that links were not working in notes, for example. Some things were not working. So these kind of things only come up when you put live scenarios and actually work with it, and not test it in isolation. And finding internal, fanboys and fangirls. Uh, that's one thing about, again, when you're building for a large customer base, you realize that there is a small customer base within your company, maybe sitting next to you or on the same floor. No, find these people. These people actually become your advocates and your subject matter experts in the long run. And when you dog food with these people, release it to these products, they can give you insights firsthand, and they just tap your shoulder and tell that this is not working, and that is not possible with speaking to customers, MVPs, or anyone around. And solve problems close to you. So this is a great thing which I have been doing at Microsoft also. Like, when there are internal fanboys at the same time, and fangirls. At the same time, there are these problems which need your software, which are internal to the company itself. So what I did in SharePoint is that we built solutions for employee donations and for NGOs within the company, and they never knew you could do that with the SharePoint or whatever solution I built, that integrated solution I built. Like I personally built it, not through others' help. So what happens is you get scenarios in return of actually building a POC. So you build a POC with this low cost, low risk bunch of people. And this POC, you can pitch it to management on top, and you can ask for more funding, funding for more people, funding for features. And that's where your graph goes into the market acquisition to the growth phase, where you can build this POCs easily. And the one thing about this slide, especially among all the slides, is this is free of cost, and this you can do just sitting at your desk within your company, and you don't need like any kind of, at least for me, I never needed an executive approval to actually do any of these. This was like free of cost and zero paise mein, like I did everything at zero money. And another big thing about enterprise products, moving on, is integration. And that's it, integrate, always integrate your product, because neither the enterprise software nor the tasks exist in isolation. The workflows are so intertwined and so crazy because everything is connected, the task, the software, the people. And that's where, again, if I go back to a Teams or a Slack example, or Mozilla Firefox, what they did long back with the plugin ecosystem, that's where they became the, probably Mozilla at one time was like the topmost browser in the world, because it integrated with everything, with my personal ecosystem anywhere I go really, really well. And that's what these companies do. They integrate. Like a great example I saw was a Salesforce example on the internet, where when you get leads, right, uh, in the Outlook email, you copy the email address, go to the CRM software, search for the details there. But what they did, they built a plugin. You just click in Outlook itself, and you get the lead data there. So what happens is, when you have this interoperability in place, everything works together. People don't have to go to software 1, software 2, software 3 and do work. No, reduce the path, make the path shorter, reduce the time. And that's what brings delight to the people. Now they won't realize this is happening, but when there is just a if anybody uses Teams here, with those buttons of Azure or Jira at the bottom, you just click and your comment becomes a bug item. People will be like, uh, oh yeah, this is the software I want, I don't have to go to multiple places. And that's what I say, take the solution to the user. Put things in context, don't make them go everywhere, don't make them find things in their bookmarks or log in hundreds of times, and just keep it in context, keep it flexible, so that people can find their own path. The longer path always stays, the shorter path is always better. Now the next one, sorry, this is where I integrated almost 5-7 slides into a single slide. I talk about outliers, and this is like, I think we can talk about this for a week as to how to do it. Accessibility, internationalization, how does you do a card design and it should work in German, English, like German is 1.5 times English, the length, and Chinese or traditional Chinese is like one character. Now, how do you visually balance these things, right? These are pretty complicated things, which you face every day. But then what I feel has uh, uh, actually worked is having a design system in place. So I don't have any specific slide with what I did here, because all I did was enough testing with data and enough uh, uh, languages, I would say, for internationalization, localization. So I can speak several languages. Thankfully, I'm boasting about myself. I can speak like 7 Indian languages. Now, I test every software in all the languages I know. And I've learned a few of them on Duolingo, just to make sure, understand some characters in Chinese and some characters in some other, the Thai language, which has a different script altogether. So test it out, test out the accessibility. Like there's something called the high contrast mode in Windows. And there are weeks where I just use the high contrast mode and just try to understand how your software feels and looks in that particular mode. I think it's all about testing, being empathetic to your users, and just exploring and talking to people again, especially in the first two, so that you can take care of these things from day one. Because any of these things I'm talking about on the screen or I mentioned on the screen, as softwares grow over time, they become complex, and complexity brings in more challenges to actually fix any of these. And if you have these in your layered UX approach from day one onwards, you can incrementally build on these instead of just one day waking up and saying, let's build this. Because sometimes building a whole accessibility into a product which is not done till now will take like 3 years to build. That's how large software cycles are. And always be careful of mandates, like the laws and the federal laws and the government policies, to make sure that the product is inclusive and diverse at the same time. And another thing which I have seen in enterprise products is people want white labeling. They want their own branding. Tesla buys a product, but they don't want people to see that it's from a company B or company A. They want it to be seen as Tesla CRM. Now, that I've seen a very great example I've seen is Twitter, where you go to a Coca-Cola page, it looks like it's made by Coca-Cola and not by Twitter. At the same time, if you go to NASA, it looks like it's made by NASA. So you have to build these small tweaks as a visual design, aesthetic, which actually changes. It's the same product, but it changes based on context, based on people, with just few tweaks. They don't have to call you back and say, make all these changes. Obviously, that brings in a lot of business for the service companies, but then I think building in customization and white labeling is something we need to think about from day one. Then coming to the last slide, this is what I was talking about, Sharan, earlier. Like after a certain point in time, there's so much less design you do, and management is what you do more. And while doing research on this is what I came across: design ops. That's apparently the new term for this. And when I say invest in design ops, I say invest time, not just money, but invest time in understanding everything that's around design. So this screen I have taken from Nielsen Norman Group, the NN Group research, and this is how they say what should be done in design ops. The whole organization structure, or the whole working environment, the design systems in place. You have to dedicate time to actually, you know, build this. It won't happen overnight, and won't happen in a day, but your process should support building any of these. Because if I go back to this slide, data and information is the only part which talks about actual design artifact. Everything else is just external to your design skill. So how do you do all this? You can't do it yourself. So you have to learn this skill. You have to have people on the team to actually do all this for your team, if not yourself. And how to do that? Process that works for everyone, and not that the process people have to work for the process. Make sure there's always a process in place which covers all the bases, because a good process will help you cover everything, and not worry about those things falling through cracks and all those. So in the end, uh, I spoke about all these things, all this great scale, great so many things, and so many complications I have seen or people come across. But then there's no silver bullet that solves this overnight, and there is no one single solution for this. You always need a good culture to build this whole design into the company, and the company should help this culture, which actually solves all these problems. And recently we have been seeing all these design maturity reports by InVision, or the design ladder by the Danish Design Center, which talks about how people do this, how companies do this, at what level they do what. I'm not talking about in detail about this, because there's a lot of literature about this already available. But once we fall into one of these categories, get our process in place and get our, I would say, do the right management, design management, I think that frees up time to do what designers actually love doing and what brings you here, which is problem solving. And that is why we need to manage all the other 10 points I just mentioned. Uh, and that's the reason I am here, Sharon. Problem solving is what brought me from engineering. I started problem solving when I saw a really bad looking poster on a wall in my college. I went to my, I don't know, one of my friends from college, he was planning to join, with whom I actually learned everything together. So that poster changed my life. I thought I could do better. I went ahead, solved the problem, and I am here today. And that's what brought me from engineering to design. So thank you, everyone. That ends my discussion now.
So, guys, we'll be taking questions. I'm going to ask Naveed some questions right now, but please type in any other questions that you might have. Naveed, I think we can talk about a few of the other questions that came in. Firstly,
Sure.
you mentioned earlier in the early part of your presentation that sales is driving the adoption. There must be like a large focus on sales-centric features, and you must be doing these competitive matrices, and you're seeing whether your product feature matches all the things in the ecosystem that is out there. So, are you necessarily playing catch up all the time?
So catch up always depends on what phase you are in, right? Of product's life cycle. And I think at some points you have to play catch up, but there'll come a point in the product life cycle where you have to innovate. Like you can't release, if you're releasing a competitor product, you can't say, oh, we also have this 10 features and please use our product. That will never work, because even if you put the pricing model down, because all the training cost and the learning cost is really high. If there needs to be a value prop and there needs to be some innovation on that front which will actually help people buy your product, and that is where I feel design can play a role in understanding what the gaps and the blind spots in the other product are. Like what were the gaps in Internet Explorer that Firefox actually became so huge, and what were the gaps in Firefox which made Chrome really huge. So
Right.
I think sometimes you need to understand people, and that sensibilities designers primarily bring to the table. So I think that's what designers need to understand, these problems and the opportunities available in a product. The catch up definitely needs to be there, but that will not suffice in your, even in your sales, even if your sales say so. At the same time, I never had such bad experience with sales folks, because I don't think salespeople are wrong. They want to sell things,
Sure.
but at the same time, they're not wrong. If it at the end of the day, you might be a designer, you might be a researcher, and if you do great research and great design, and if it doesn't sell, it's of no use.
Sure.
So I make sure that I listen to my salespeople, and though my product is not 100% influenced by it, I take a lot of direction from them, because I don't think they are wrong. They're also trying to get their job. Nobody's trying to bring the product down by doing a sales-based approach. But yeah, this is something that you have to be wary about. This is not something you can do it alone, but as a design team, as a design culture, it has to promote a design-centric approach to the whole product itself.
But you still have the challenge of appealing to the decision maker who may not be your user, right? In such a scenario, the decision maker is necessarily, I mean, also covering their own assets, right? They have to make the right decision, and their decision has to be justified. So they must have done a comparison before making a choice. Is that what you see as a pattern, or do you see a different pattern?
Yes, yes. So that's what I said. So my product manager gave me a Gartner report and said, "Are we covering these 250 points?" And as a product approach, I don't think you think of these 250 points on in your second year. You have to think about it from day zero. And like I said, sales is, you have to sell your product in the first years, especially 1.0 products, right? you have to sell them in the first year so that they make a business sense to actually continue for the next 7 years.
Sure.
So I would say, I would still say find the opportunity areas in terms of great experience. If you're building a product which is already in the market, build an amazing experience. Make those processes really easy for people to adapt and people to use, and that is what will help. Though, so the focus may be on business in the early days. Make sure that the focus shifts to the UX, and you have a good UX strategy in place so that 1 year down the line, I'll do this.
Okay. You also spoke about the timelines that you're dealing with. I mean, you spoke about certain features that take 3 years to come to fulfill, or the full set of it comes to fore. In such a thing, how do you keep focus? How do you stay focused on the objective that you wanted to achieve on day one, 900 days later?
I I think the vision, I think it all depends on the vision. The vision never changes if day one or it's day 900, right? As a larger vision of Microsoft itself, if you say empowering every person on the planet to achieve more, I think the core, if your core ideals are same, I don't think the vision changes over time. But at the same time, if you're actually tracking features, I wouldn't say what you thought of it on day one will be same on day 900. Things change. Like your sales people will tell you things to do. Your customer advisory groups will tell you things that might change on the path. And so what I would say is, if your strategy, if your product strategy and your design strategy is good enough to do the pivot at any point in time, I think that is what will actually go a long way. Like I have consciously made a decision that I'll not love my product. Now, I love my product, but I'll not keep it so close that if something changes, I'll be too annoyed or too worried about it. Because if you go by numbers, go by data, go by research, you'll realize that you were wrong in some places and some tweaks need to be made. It's just the growth phase and the learning phase. The product will evolve, you will evolve, and on the way you will realize the product needs to pivot at some point and do things different than what you thought earlier.
Okay. Guru's asked a question here which says, to what level of detail do you document your process? I mean, you can be too detailed, you can be and waste your time there. So what do you think?
So there was a time I used to open XD and write every day what changes I made. So that was the kind level of detail I used to do. But I think the the main purpose of documentation, I feel, is the communication part. Like you see this whole war, I would say cold war between engineering and design, right? This has been happening since Don Norman was working in his early days to even today, and probably in the future too. This will never end. So that's where I started actually documenting these change logs in my XD file. It will actually say I changed the color of this button to this because research said this based on this bug with PM discussion, whatever, right? I actually used to do that.
Yeah.
But I think the level of documentation, I would say, is my main purpose was just to communicate with engineering, and all that was required was at least putting it on paper was what changes were made so that we can go back and refer to it. Because in 1 to 900 days you forget a lot of things, you lose track of why the change was made. And at the same time, by documentation need not always be on paper or in your file. The kind of documentations you can loosely call it documentation, but we actually sit with engineering every 15 days to actually discuss the design which is being delivered, so that they are on the same page as to how a particular animation should be, or how a particular flow should be, and what data point it should show. I think those kind of processes and documentation is more important than actually maintaining your changes. And if you communicate well to the other party, the PM and the design and the engineering, especially in enterprises when, like, in 900 days there is so much churn in the employee base, that it's like the ship of Theseus, right? On 900th day the whole team will change, and nobody from day one will be even part of the team. So I think it's about communication, keeping it clear, and there are systems in place like Jira, or like even something as simple as Word would do.
Sure. But while there's churn, there's also churn of designers also that might be product.
Yes,
So you're saying this kind of documentation is useful to know why you came to where you came.
yes,
You're not.
exactly. Because what I have seen in places is, so I work on these products, I move on to a different product, and 6 months later the new team is working on the same problem I was working on,
Sure.
or a change we made has been rolled back because the designer thought this is the right thing to do. But yeah, aesthetically, experience wise is the right thing to do, but because you don't document those accessibility issues or those string issues which you are facing in some, right to left language, unless you document those, you can never actually have a good process. But it's difficult, it's not straightforward, it needs a good, I follow a good process, I feel, by documenting these changes. But the guy next to me doesn't do that, so it breaks the process. I think it's again building the whole culture part.
Okay, then who actually owns this design system? I mean, and do you also like how do you manage new ideas coming in versus old ideas, old tested ideas staying?
So who manages the design system? I think uh, design systems are pretty democratic these days. I think it's like the, I don't know if you have people have worked in the open source and environment, but that's exactly how design systems in enterprises work.
Okay.
There's a central team which is working on design systems all the time, developing these standards, these nomenclatures, these new patterns, but everybody is contributing to that over time. Like I said, it evolves over time, and these people are contributing upstream, and those people are just approving and taking this whole things, and then everybody uses it downstream. So that's how the design systems are being managed. But again, I would say we are still in the early phases. Figma is helping to a great extent, Slack has helped to a great extent, but I think we still have a long way to go. I'm really happy the kind of things Figma is doing, but then the whole documentation part and the whole version control, we're still not there yet, because maybe in future we'll see some changes in the whole documentation front. And what was your second question, Sharon?
No, I was just talking about who approves stuff to change and who and versus who makes that decision of longevity versus change. You know, products need to evolve.
I think, yeah, so products need to evolve, but again, longevity depends on, I don't think I would make an irrational decision to actually change a design just because I felt it so. uh, I think it's just about what is backing your decision. If that decision is strong enough, you can convince yourself and your engineering team to actually do it. And you need this data in place, because a change is super expensive in terms of engineering. Design, it's pretty easy, I would say. But when you actually go and code it, and the release to market time is so huge that people don't want changes. And you get comments like, uh, don't don't fix what's not broken, right?
Yeah,
So in design you might feel a lot of times that, oh, this new trend seems to be working well. So I think the change, I would say, and designers should focus not on these new trends and new things, but what innovation you can do, what research you can do, just to make the whole life simpler or productivity more efficient, than to actually implementing new design patterns or new color palettes, to be crude, like new color palettes, or things like those. I think we need more focus on research for opportunities.
sure. It actually segues well into the Praveen Sapiens question over here. He says, have you ever come across any product features which were failures for end users but demanded from customers, being the buyers or the decision makers?
I remember there was some instance, but uh, uh, I can't think of an exact example. But I think you see a lot in the admin consoles which you make. Admins want to see reports, right? Admins want to see things, But then what happens is when you're actually, so what happens is, suppose you're seeing a PPT and you're taking a course, and every next slide is being tracked by the company. Now, the slide which goes back and when it switches to the next slide, it has to send data to the server, come back, and then only move to the next slide. It has to record that. And this on low internet speeds keeps spinning, right? And people get really annoyed. But then the customer is like, no, we want the report, because if they don't do 80% by 25th of this month, we have to fire them. So you hear things like this and you can't not do it, because that's their requirement, which is not untrue. So this is one example I remember which we faced, where this happened, but it's not inevitable, I would say.
Okay. I wanted to talk about what you spoke about earlier, about talking to different stakeholders, but specifically about the interoperability and such. So let's say you have teams which talks to PowerPoint, for example. That's all within the company. But when you're building features for interoperability in Teams with a competitive product for PowerPoint, how do you manage something like that? How do you weigh the pros and cons of something like that?
Uh, See, there are competitors, and I don't think that should deter you from what you want to do, right? Like, there is Teams, there is Slack. So Slack built this. If you remember, Slack had this huge New York Times ad when Teams released saying you can't just copy us and do whatever we are doing. So
Yep.
I think if you think you can actually provide value in that space, I think you should just go ahead and do it. And in terms of collaboration, I would say, uh, I don't think, like, personally, I've never collaborated with what the company would call competitors, but what has always helped is the engineering, uh, what do you say, vision of the company, which helps in these integrations and collaborations. Engineers, when they write these REST APIs and those kind of stuff, that is what helps in these integrations. And you have to work really closely with your engineering team to actually build these kind of things, though you may say it's not like it's not part of design itself, right? It's more like a product experience part, not actually a user interface design area. But then if you think that this kind of building this ecosystem is what helps, I think engineering can greatly help you in actually building these uh, platform to actually enable integration for others. And I think a lot of companies are doing it. Like, I think everybody, I have seen a lot of customers, once we release the product, they say, do you have REST APIs? Because it's not just about integrating with this product itself, but uh, uh, sorry, using this product itself, but they have maybe a Sugar CRM in place, and they
Yeah,
just want to put this whole LMS in that widget in Sugar CRM. So I think it's just again a product decision more than a design decision.
sure. And lastly, a question probably only you can answer, being an enterprise designer. When is the best time to talk to your lawyers?
Always.
Always. Okay. No, because
So
yeah, you get my question. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, there are these lot of things which you see, uh, which you might think, okay, if I do this particular design pattern, or or copy this design pattern, there be some, will somebody sue me, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I make a thing which is exactly like Amazon, which sells baby clothes, for example, now will Amazon sue me? No, well, not necessarily, because in an e-commerce space there's only so much innovation you can do, and you know what works. And if
Right.
you just replicate the interaction pattern, I don't think that should affect anybody, unless you are doing a grave patent violation. At the same time, one good thing about Microsoft is, like, uh, uh, I think this you learn over time when you get a lot of litigations and get sued so many times, that they have a legal terminology in place. Like, For example, I can't use a specific font in my official templates facing customers, or the kind of dummy names I use instead of lorem ipsum are standardized by legal. Everything is the kind of companies I can say, oh, I'm selling this product and there is this example company called eagle.com. I can't say eagle.com. There is a company called, there are standard company names. So it's like over time, like I said, it's part of the culture which you start building it, saying keep people as safe as possible, at the same time keep your products as safe as possible by standardizing processes and standardizing documentation. So I think and another great thing with legal, like any other department, is they never reply to your emails, which is a personal experience. So make sure there's a system in place.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Naveed. This has been great. And Preeti.
Yes, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. We would love to upload your presentation to our website if you give us permission to, since we just spoke about legal and everything.
Yeah, that's why if you see, there's nothing, everything is from Wikipedia here. So nothing is legal issue. And that's what happens when you work in open source companies. You know where to find these places where you find open source content. So that's one thing I learned. So.
We would also love to put the recording of the entire session on our YouTube channel. If you give permission to.
Yeah, sure, Preeti. That would be.
That we so whoever missed this session always has a place to come back and listen to it later or watch it later.
Sure, definitely.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this for us.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharan. Thank you, Preeti, for inviting me. This was a great experience. At least I started documenting, like I said, this whole topic. So it was great speaking to you. And thanks everybody who joined the call. I was not expecting this big number, but yeah, this was great.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us. And please stay tuned for our next Experience Fridays, which will be happening in the January of the new year.
Yeah. All right.
And yeah, Happy New Year to everybody.
Yeah. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.